Hi there guys, my name is Jacob and welcome back to the channel. Now in today's video I want to talk to you guys about my mortgage and more specifically overpaying my mortgage and the benefits that that can have. So I'm going to run you through the details of what my mortgage currently is, what overpayment I'm thinking of making and the impact that will have on the mortgage and ultimately why I want to do this in the first place. So I bought this house a little under 2 years ago and it cost me £365,000. Now I live in the Midlands in the UK. £365,000 is a lot of money. And you don't get a massive amount of house for that money, if I'm being honest. I live in a 3-bed semi-detached house with a garage, a nice garden, a fairly big drive, but a 3-bed semi, it's a fairly average style house. Just so happens I live in a fairly expensive area to live in, so that's the price I had to pay. Now of that 365,000, I was quite lucky that 165,000 came from equity that I had from my previous house. And that equity came from, again, me overpaying the mortgage over the 7 years that we lived there, and also appreciation in the house's value whilst we lived there. So quite lucky really that when we moved into this house, we had quite a large amount of equity to put into this house. So even though it cost 365,000, the mortgage that we ended up with was 200,000, and that was our starting point moving into this house. Now 200,000 is still a large amount of money to borrow from the bank, and it's a lot of money to pay back. So initially we went for a 30-year mortgage, and that percentage was at 3.91%. And our monthly payments to pay that back are £950 a month. So basically I have a payment of £950 that I am going to have to pay for 30 years. And it's a big amount of money to have to pay every month, and it's a long time to have to commit to pay that. So of course, in my mind, I want to get that paid off much quicker than 30 years. And of course, there are other benefits too, such as saving on interest and things like that when it comes to making overpayments. So I have made a couple of overpayments this year, but the remaining amount that I am allowed to overpay this year on my mortgage, and overall I'm allowed to overpay 10% per year. But my current balance is £191,780. That's my current balance. Now I have overpaid a little bit so far this year, but the remaining amount I'm allowed to overpay £18,500 before they hit me with a penalty for overpaying too much. So of course I am looking to overpay £18,500 in my next overpayment, and that money is coming from selling investments that I have, stock investments. It just so happens that I have a nice chunk of money in some stock investments, and at the moment they're actually doing quite well. So I thought now is a good time to just take a bit of that money with some of the profit and pay off some of the mortgage. Makes sense to do some good with that money and actually make it have an impact. And there's really not much better place to do that than overpaying the mortgage. So that's what I'm going to do. Now, as I said, my balance is £191,780 at the moment. And the term on that mortgage is 27 years and 8 months. That is what is left of the original 30 years that I started with. So 27 years and 8 months. Now, by overpaying £18,500, that will actually reduce the term by 4 years and 5 months. So that's quite a big impact, reducing that term down. So it will save me 4 years and 5 months of mortgage payments, which is a staggering amount of money when you actually work it out. And that will make the new term 23 years and 3 months left to pay. Now, to be honest, that's still too long for me. So I will continue making overpayments in the following years. But it's nice to see it come down, quite a substantial amount with this overpayment. Now, I'm 32 years old at the moment. So even with that 23-year term, I'm still looking at about 55 years old for when this mortgage would be paid off if I continued to just pay it each month. And that doesn't really work for me, because ultimately I want to retire a little bit earlier than most people. And to be able to do that, I'm going to need to pay this mortgage off. So I want to keep overpaying it in the coming years, so I can at least get it down to under 50 years old. So I want to knock off at least another 5 years of the mortgage. But that will be for years to come when I make further overpayments. But as I said, so making this overpayment of 18,500, that will actually save me a ridiculous amount of interest, actually more than the overpayment itself. Now, I worked it out, and the interest savings, if I just kept the mortgage for the next 23 years of what is left, then the amount of interest this single overpayment will save me is £31,717. So, substantially more interest saved than the actual overpayment itself, which, it just shows you how much money we end up paying on mortgages over the lifetime of them. I'm taking out I took out a £200,000 mortgage. You can safely say that I would have paid way more than double that back to the bank if all I do is make mortgage payments. So that's why I think it's so crucial that we overpay our mortgages and get them paid off as soon as possible, because the amount we end up paying to the bank is just ridiculous. So my balance after the overpayment will end up being reduced from 191,000 down to 173,000. So that's, a nice chunk down, but still a lot of money left on the balance. So there's many more years to go of payments, and, many more overpayments to be made. That's for sure. As I said, my monthly payments are £950 on this mortgage. And the way I do it with overpayments is I reduce the term of the mortgage when I make the overpayment. I do not reduce the monthly payment. And the reason for that is, if I wanted to, I could pay this 18,500 to the bank. I could reduce my monthly payment, and that would reduce the £950 maybe down to £900. But ultimately, that doesn't really save me any interest, because it allows me to not pay as much money per month out of my account to the bank. But the term would still be 27 years, and I would still pay the same amount of interest, which is no use to me. I'm trying to, pay this mortgage off earlier, and I'm trying to save interest, interest payments. So when you make an overpayment, make sure you are reducing the term and not reducing the payment. That is quite critical when you make an overpayment. And, I use Santander for my mortgage, and it specifically asks you when you make an overpayment, of those two options, which would you like to do with the overpayment? So just make sure you click the right one if making an overpayment is something you would like to do. Now, there's a few reasons, of course, why I want to do this. And I know people will be saying, well, why would you want to pay off your mortgage when potentially there are better interest rates out there? That, you could put this money in a savings account or an investment, stocks, you name it, and potentially achieve a better interest rate than the 3.91 that my current mortgage is. And there's a few reasons for that, really. And, there's more to overpaying your mortgage than just the financial side of it. Although, of course, the financial side is huge and it's a major factor. There's more to it than that. For me, paying off my house, basically I could have 200,000 in stocks, or I could, use 200,000 to pay off my house, if I had 200,000. For me, I would love to have this house paid off. And that means more to me than having a huge chunk of money in the bank. Of course, I'd love both, but, I'm not rich. I've got a normal job, so I have to be, clever with my money to try and make this all work. But ultimately, having a paid off house gives you security. It gives you a sense of, pride, a sense of control over your own life, that ultimately, no one's going to take your house away from you. And ultimately, what I'm trying to achieve is reducing my monthly bills down to the lowest level that I can realistically get them. And that is for a number of reasons. And, mostly because I want as low monthly bills as I can get. So achieving early retirement becomes more achievable. The bigger your monthly outgoings are, the harder it is going to be to retire early because the more money you need coming in. And if you're not working, that is difficult. Having money coming in when you're not working, you need investments, you need side incomes, different things like that. So the lower my monthly bills are when it comes to retiring early, the easier that's going to be to achieve. And of course, as I said earlier, my mortgage is the biggest monthly outgoing I have at £950 a month. So if I got rid of that completely out of my monthly outgoings, life would just become a lot easier. And I think it would be for most people. I think most people watching this video, either pays a mortgage or pays rent. And I would bet that those payments are probably the biggest payments they pay out every month. And you'd probably agree that if you didn't have to pay that anymore, life would just be a lot easier. And you could use that money for other things that you enjoy doing, whether that's saving, investing, whether that's traveling, whether that would be treating yourself to things you really want but you can't afford. There's all manner of things you could do with that money once you're not spending it on a mortgage. But ultimately, for me, the ultimate goal is retiring early. And to be able to achieve that, I need to lower my bills far more than they are now, so it makes it livable. So I can bring in a certain amount of money that covers my monthly outgoings. And like I said earlier, the lower that number is, the easier it is to achieve. And another reason is, of course, saving interest on the mortgage. Now, as I said earlier, my payments are £950. And at the moment, prior to the overpayment, every month that I make a payment, around £620 a month of that whole payment is interest. So that is more than 2/3 of the overall payment that I pay to the bank every month. 2/3 of it is interest. And to me, that's just dead money. I'm not getting anything for that money. And that's a lot of money to just be wasting every month. Now, of course, I know that I need a mortgage. I can't pay for this house any other way. But the sooner I can get rid of those payments, the better, because the sooner I'll be able to put that 600 odd pounds to better use and for it to actually help me do something rather than just make the bank richer. So, of course, making this 18,500 overpayment is going to reduce that monthly figure down from 620 to probably below 600. So, more money of that 950 will actually be going to the capital payment every month and reducing the balance down rather than just being paid in interest. So there you have it, guys. That is, a summary of what I'm doing with my mortgage at the moment. And, I'll be making this overpayment in the next week or so. So, yeah, it's going to have an impact pretty soon on my mortgage. But what do you guys think? Do you guys overpay your mortgage, or do you think, you'd rather use that money for other things, such as investments, things like that, keep it in a savings account? Let me know down in the comments. Maybe you've paid your mortgage off and, maybe you agree with me that it's better to not have a mortgage, or some people are completely the opposite and actually think it's better to keep the mortgage as long as you can. And as I said before, use your money to, buy stocks and investments, things like that. But let me know down in the comments what you think of all this. I would be really interested to know. And guys, I'll leave it there. If you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. Maybe consider hitting the like button and the subscribe button if you enjoyed this video. And guys, I'll catch you in the next one.